They handed me the court summons the same day I lit a candle for my son's birthday. He would have turned 34. Instead, I was being sued by the woman who left his funeral before the casket was even closed. My name is Anwen Radcliffe, and 6 months after losing my only child, I was told I was unfit to raise my grandson, the same boy I'd been tucking into bed every night since his mother disappeared to Florida. She said I manipulated him. She said I lied. She told the judge my grandson never chose me, and that I made it all up. But there's one thing she didn't know. He heard her say it, and he recorded everything. The snow had started early that year. By late January, Snowfield was buried under thick white silence, as if the world itself had chosen to hold its breath. I stood by the kitchen window, pouring hot water over tea leaves, while Silas shuffled into the room in his wool socks, still half asleep. He was 12, but grief had aged him in ways no child should ever know. His shoulders sagged where they used to square up like his father's. Jonas would have scolded him for not wearing slippers. Jonas would have been up by 5, already shoveling the driveway, laughing at the cold like it was an old friend. But Jonas wasn't here anymore. 6 months had passed since the call, since the cruiser flipped during a pursuit on Route 302, since I stood at the edge of a flag-draped coffin, holding Silas's hand while his mother stared blankly from across the cemetery, then vanished 2 weeks later, headed to Florida with a man I'd never met. And just like that, Silas became mine, not legally, not officially, but in the way that matters. Dinner every night, book before bed, arms when the nightmares came. We never talked about it like a decision. He simply never packed a bag. I never asked when she'd be back. That morning, I found the envelope wedged between utility bills and grocery coupons. Plain manila. No return address. I sliced it open with a paring knife and pulled out the papers. Summons to appear in family court. Trina was suing me for unlawful custody of her child. There was a note attached from her lawyer, typed in that passive, clean language that stung more than it should. Our client maintains the child never expressed a desire to remain in Vermont and that the current arrangement is not in his best interest. Mr. Radcliffe's continued influence appears emotionally coercive. I sat down slowly, feeling the weight settle behind my ribs. Not shock. That had passed long ago. This was something colder, something heavier. Inside the documents was an addendum, a psychological report from 19 years ago, after my husband died. I had admitted myself to a center for 3 weeks. It was a safe place, they'd said, just somewhere to catch your breath. Now it was being used as evidence. They called it unresolved grief and depressive tendencies. They didn't say I got up every morning after. They didn't say I raised Jonas on my own. They didn't say I showed up for every parent-teacher meeting, every shift change, every scraped knee and teenage breakdown. None of that was on paper. But this wound from a life ago, now painted me as unstable, dangerous, unfit. I didn't wake Silas. I didn't cry. I simply placed the documents back into the envelope, walked to the back room, and locked them in Jonas's old footlocker. Because I knew what came next. They'd drag my past out into a courtroom, polish it under fluorescent lights, and ask a boy who'd lost everything to pick between a mother who left and a grandmother being erased. I went back to the stove. The kettle was still hot. Silas came into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "Morning, Nana," he mumbled. I smiled. "Morning, love?" "Eggs or toast?" He grinned. "Both." I didn't tell him about the envelope. Not yet, because he had already made his choice, and I would not let them take it from him quietly. I hadn't been in the back office of the old bakery since it was converted into a legal co-op. It smelled faintly of cinnamon and photocopier toner. Harriet Chen's new practice was wedged between a dog groomer and a chiropractor, hardly the marble halls of justice. But in this town, that didn't matter. What mattered was who stayed. Harriet had. She was just a kid when I taught her to sound out Charlotte's Web in the children's corner of the library. Now she was 30, sharp as a scalpel, and specialized in family law, particularly protective custody and minor rights. She offered me tea. I declined. When I handed her the court papers, she read through them once, then again, slower. Her lips tightened as she reached the end. "She's digging in," Harriet muttered. "But we might have more leverage than she thinks." She pulled out her laptop, clicked through state records, and requested Jonas's death benefits file. Then she opened another portal, one I hadn't known existed, linked to police honors and legacy trusts. Harriet frowned. Jonas was meticulous. My breath held. She turned the screen toward me. Before he died, Jonas had set up a revocable living trust in Silas's name. Over $600,000, pooled from his life insurance, hazard duty pay, and a line item marked posthumous valor compensation from the state police. But what caught Harriet's attention wasn't the amount, it was the clause. Custodial withdrawal privileges are granted solely to the child's legal guardian, as recognized by state court authority. Full access to the fund is restricted until the beneficiary turns 25. No exceptions. I blinked. So, if I'm made guardian? The money stays untouched until Silas is grown. You can't use it. No one can. I nodded. And if Trina wins? Harriet's fingers hovered over the touchpad. Then she can petition the probate court to restructure the trust. She's the biological parent, so she could argue for family financial integration, basically fold the assets into her own estate. I felt my jaw lock, Harriet added gently. She could also appoint a co-trustee to manage investments. That could be her current partner, Richard Foreman, correct? I knew that name. A venture advisor, Trina had said. No license, no office, just glossy teeth, 3 phones, and a LinkedIn profile full of buzzwords. She was going to trade her son's future for portfolio leverage. I stared at the document. $600,000. Enough to buy a home, pay for college, start a life. But that wasn't what I feared losing. It was Silas. It was the quiet in his eyes when he picked up a book on his own. The way he folded his napkin like Jonas used to. The small, fragile things that money couldn't touch, but greed always destroyed. I wasn't fighting for the trust. I was fighting to make sure Silas didn't become someone's transaction, because children aren't investments, and love isn't leverage. It was past midnight when I heard movement upstairs, not the creak of an old house settling, but deliberate steps, soft, measured. I slipped out of bed, wrapped myself in Jonas's flannel, and climbed the narrow stairs to the attic loft. The hatch was half open, yellow light spilling onto the landing. There, huddled beneath a blanket. Silas sat cross-legged beside an old toy chest. In his hand was a small digital recorder, one of those black rectangular ones that reporters still used. His fingers moved over it with an ease that made my stomach turn. He looked up, startled, then motioned me to sit beside him. No words, just a quiet click. And then Trina's voice, fuzzy, distant, but unmistakable. If I don't bring him back, his grandmother gets everything. She'll lock it up till he's 40. You think I gave birth just to let her raise my retirement? The audio ended. My spine went rigid. But Silas just stared at the floor. I didn't mean to record it, he whispered. I left it on by accident during FaceTime. Then I kept doing it. Another click. Another voice clip. I'm sick of pretending I enjoy this. Every morning I make his cereal and I want to scream. I didn't sign up for this full-time motherhood crap. Silas's hand hovered over the stop button, not pressing it. I don't want to use these, he said. I just needed to hear that I wasn't imagining it. My throat tightened. Why record them then? He looked at me, his eyes older than any 12-year-old's should be, because part of me still wants her to love me, and I think if I say how I feel out loud, she'll hate me for real. I reached out and pulled him into my chest. He didn't cry. He trembled, like his heart didn't know which way to fall. I'm not giving this to court, he said into my collar. I just wanted to remember what was real. I didn't push him, because sometimes survival means carrying truth like a stone in your pocket, just to remind yourself it was never your fault. We sat there until the recorder blinked out. The snow outside had started again, but inside, the attic was warm, and for once, the silence didn't feel empty. The cold that morning didn't just bite, it cut. Sliced through coat seams and scarf folds, soaked into bones like water into wood. The courthouse in Snowfield wasn't much more than an old logging hall converted after the war. Wood-paneled walls, creaky benches, and a single brass heater that clicked more than it warmed. Still, every seat was filled. Not for me, not for Trina, but because people in a small town remember who buried the flag and who walked away. I wore Jonas's coat. The seams still held his shape. My hands didn't stop moving, fidgeting with the old fountain pen he used when writing up reports. It had leaked once in his pocket. He never cleaned the ink stain. Said it reminded him that some things shouldn't wash off. Harriet sat to my left, spine straight, expression unreadable. Trina entered like a headline, manicured, crisp, her hair done up in waves she never wore when she was a mother. Behind her, her lawyer, crisp suit, big city accent, eyes that already assumed we'd lose. The man rose immediately and requested a closed hearing. The child is under extreme emotional duress, he said. I said nothing. The judge, gray-browed, quiet, allowed the motion. Then Trina stood. I'm not doing this for money, she began, her voice quivering just enough to seem honest. I'm doing this because my son is being emotionally manipulated by a woman who never forgave me for taking away her son. A wave of murmurs rolled through the gallery. Her attorney followed with evidence. Photos of me sitting alone in the living room, tears visible. A therapist's note from when I was 40, citing episodes of grief-related instability. An ancient 911 transcript from Jonas's funeral, the day I collapsed from panic in the cemetery. I sat still. They weren't lies, but they weren't the truth either. Then Harriet reached into her briefcase. She pulled out a sealed envelope, her hands calm. She handed it to the clerk. The judge opened it, eyebrows lifting ever so slightly. Harriet said, "This letter was delivered to my office by Mr. Radcliffe, 3 months before his death." He read silently. Then he asked if he could read it into the record. The room quieted. If anything ever happens to me and this letter is needed, it means I'm gone. I need it known that my mother has raised me with more strength than I ever had myself. Trina hasn't acted as a mother to Silas in years. If I'm not here anymore, Silas deserves to be raised by the person who doesn't have to be told to love him. She's been doing it all his life. Jonas Radcliffe. My hands shook, not from cold. Because for the first time in that room, I wasn't defending myself. Jonas had already done it for me. And there, beneath the stale breath of the heater and the icy silence of strangers' judgment, I felt my son stand beside me, not in body, but in truth. And that was warmer than anything I'd worn all winter. The second day felt colder. Trina's seat was lined with tissues now. She dabbed her eyes between stories of being shut out, alienated, and replaced. She painted me as a relic, a woman clinging to the past, forcing Silas into silence, banning phones, and micromanaging every breath he took. She wants him to live in a museum to her grief, she said, voice cracking. He doesn't get a childhood in that house. He gets a daily obituary. I clenched the pen tighter. Then the door opened. Mrs. Owens, Silas's homeroom teacher, walked in, a quiet presence wrapped in a warm green coat. She adjusted her glasses, looked at the judge, and asked to speak. I've been teaching 23 years, she said. Silas comes to school clean, prepared and early. His homework's done. He says thank you and makes jokes when the room's tense, and I've never seen a child who smiles that often, under the care of someone cruel. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. Next came Joe, the postman, grizzled, slow-moving, always smelled like motor oil. Every month, he said, that boy pedals to my mailbox and hands me a letter addressed to a different officer who served with his dad. Every single month, written by hand. No spelling errors. Sealed with care. You think someone coached that? He looked at Trina. Kids don't fake that kind of soul. The judge asked if we had anything else. Harriet stood. One last submission. She cued a recording. Trina's voice again, offhand, grainy. I don't give a damn what school he goes to. As long as I can get access to the money, he can learn online for all I care. No one spoke after that. Court adjourned for lunch. People shuffled outside, breath steaming in the wind. I stepped into the bitter air, letting it sting my cheeks. Silas found me by the frozen bench outside the courthouse. He didn't speak, just reached into his coat and pulled out something small, a silver locket, old, dented at the edge. He handed it to me. Inside were 3 things: a tiny picture of Jonas, a smaller one of me, and a folded slip of paper, written in Jonas's handwriting, barely legible from time. If someday the choice feels like drowning, choose the one who helps you breathe, not the one who makes you hold it in. I closed the locket, pressed it to my chest, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself cry. Not from fear, but because I knew we weren't alone. By the 3rd morning of court, the battle had spilled beyond the courtroom and into the digital bloodbath of the internet. A TikTok account popped up overnight, a Justice for Silas. Its first video was a montage, badly edited but emotionally manipulative. It showed a dim bedroom, the sound of a door locking, a boy's silhouette staring out a window. Spliced into it were photos of me sitting in the cemetery, wrapped in my wool coat, surrounded by winter and gravestones. A caption slid across the screen in stark white. When you hold on to a child to soothe your own grief. Is that love? The video ended with slow piano music and a final shot of Silas looking distant, an image clearly taken from a school project I'd framed in our living room. I wasn't angry. I was cold. Not from the snow, but from the realization Trina didn't need to win in court. She only needed the world to believe I was a sad, old woman clinging to a child who didn't belong to her, and online, facts didn't matter. Viral did. But then, something unexpected happened. A second video surfaced, not from Trina, but from someone else entirely. It was a clip filmed in a crowded bar, the lighting low, but the audio clear. Trina, in a short leather jacket, held a drink in one hand and leaned into someone's ear. Snowfield's a graveyard for dreams. If I stay there long enough, I'll turn to stone. But the kid, he's my golden ticket. The account that posted it had one line in the caption. She said the quiet part out loud. I didn't recognize the username at first, but Harriet did. She squinted at the phone and whispered, "Noah Elridge, Jonas's best friend." Within the hour, Noah had contacted Harriet privately. He wanted to meet me. We arranged to meet at a cafe tucked behind the library, a place with old booths and cracked menus. He looked older than I remembered, a little more tired in the eyes, but still had that quiet steadiness Jonas once said was bulletproof. He didn't waste time. Out came a folder, photos, transcripts, screenshots, printouts, and then his voice, low and steady. Trina's boyfriend, Randall Bricks, was sued for marital asset fraud in Colorado, got his ex-wife to open a joint account, emptied $180,000 in 12 days, and skipped town. I stared at the man across from me, heart thudding. "She's setting up the same playbook," Noah continued. "If she gets guardianship, she'll propose a financial management plan and divert the trust. Randall handles investments now. It wouldn't take long." I didn't say anything for a while. Then I did. "Why are you doing this?" He leaned back. "I'm not here to destroy Trina," he said. "I'm here because Jonas would have never let Silas become someone's exit strategy." That's when he showed me the final piece, a recording. Trina's voice again, hushed but clear. "I know Vermont law. Once I get guardianship, I can push for financial control under educational investments. He doesn't need Ivy League. I just need him to make it to 25. Then we can buy out that frozen dump of a town." Noah looked me in the eyes. "We release this if you say the word." I took a deep breath. My chest felt tight, not from fear, but from grief layered over disappointment, not just in Trina, but in how far she'd fallen from the girl Jonas once swore he loved. The next morning, the town buzzed with whispers, but the courthouse was quiet. Too quiet. Harriet and I reviewed the options. The evidence could obliterate Trina's case, but I knew what Silas didn't, the full weight of who his mother had become. If we exposed her, he'd never unhear it. I sat with that ache for hours, until a knock on the side conference room pulled me out of thought. Trina's lawyer entered, alone. His face was pale, professional, but tinged with something like regret. "My client is willing to settle," he said. "She will voluntarily withdraw her petition for full custody. She will agree to remain a non-custodial parent with visitation rights. In return, she requests $50,000 from the trust, routed through an anonymous charitable organization." Harriet didn't flinch. "We'll respond in 48 hours, she said evenly. "But if Mrs. Radcliffe declines, we will go public." The lawyer nodded once and left without another word. I sat back in the chair. My breath fogged the window beside me. Trina wasn't here for her son. She was here for a lifeline, and the only thing she had left to sell was the title of mother. For the first time, I didn't feel angry. I felt pity. And in that strange, quiet moment, I realized something even more powerful. This wasn't about beating her. It was about saving him. The fourth morning of court began not with fury, but with silence. The light had changed. There was no denying it. That faint, golden haze of early spring filtering through the frosted courtroom windows. Outside, snowmelt dripped steadily from the eaves. Inside, however, the air was still sharp and brittle, like everything in the room might shatter if touched too hard. Trina walked in slowly, wearing a navy blue coat I hadn't seen before. Her face was drawn, but her makeup was flawless, each feature sculpted like she was walking into a photo shoot, not a final verdict. But I saw it instantly. She didn't come to win. She came to leave with her dignity intact. Harriet stood and addressed the judge, her voice calm and deliberate. "Your Honor, the plaintiff agrees to dismiss all claims in this case under the following conditions. Trina Radcliffe relinquishes all custodial rights over Silas Radcliffe. All future communication with the child will be mediated solely at the discretion of Anwen Radcliffe. Miss Radcliffe will not speak publicly or participate in any media coverage pertaining to this case. In return, a donation of $50,000 will be made from Silas's trust, anonymously, to the Florida Human Rights Education Fund. The judge nodded, turning toward Trina for confirmation. And then, unexpectedly, Trina raised her hand slightly. "May I say something?" Permission was granted. She stood. For the first time in all these proceedings, she didn't flinch from my gaze. There was no bitterness, no charm, just the raw voice of someone exhausted by her own illusions. "I wasn't a good mother," she began, "but no one ever taught me how to be. I thought giving birth meant knowing how to love, but all I knew was how to fear. I've spent my life terrified of being abandoned, and somewhere along the way, I became the one doing the abandoning." The courtroom was silent. Even the clicking of pens had stopped. She turned her eyes to Silas. He didn't cry. He didn't look away. He didn't break. He simply said, steady and soft, "I forgive you, but I'm not going back." Something in Trina's posture crumpled. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She just nodded, stepped forward, and signed the papers. Then, as she gathered her things, she reached into her purse and placed something quietly on the table before me, a small folded card. She didn't look back as she walked out of the room. I waited until the door closed behind her, then I opened the card. Inside, in looping, almost too careful handwriting, were just a few words. "I didn't win, my son, but maybe I've finally reclaimed myself." I didn't smile. I didn't feel triumphant. I only felt the stillness of something long overdue. Not a victory, not revenge, but a reckoning. A right thing and at the right time, however long it took to get here. 1 month passed. The snow had melted into memory, and tender shoots of green peeked through the soil just beneath our back steps. The air no longer bit at my skin. It stirred gently, like the house itself was learning how to breathe again. Life with Silas didn't become easier overnight. It became real. He went back to his music classes at the community center, hesitant at first, then more willing as the notes returned to his fingers. I took a part-time spot back at the town library, reading picture books to a half-circle of toddlers who didn't care that I had once been the subject of a custody hearing. We didn't talk much about the trial, not because we were avoiding it, but because we didn't have to. Every quiet dinner, every morning we brushed our teeth next to each other, every walk to the mailbox, they were answers to questions we no longer needed to ask. One afternoon, I found him sitting by the window seat with a small brown leather journal in his lap, one I hadn't seen since before Jonas passed. It was the notebook Jonas had started for him. 10 things a man should know before becoming a grown man. 9 pages were filled, written in his father's square, tidy script. The 10th page was blank until Silas picked up a pen and wrote, Lesson 10. Don't keep the truth to hurt someone. Keep it to learn how to forgive. Because sometimes, forgiveness is the only thing that keeps you from becoming a reflection of the pain you survived. I didn't cry. I just sat there with him in the late afternoon sun, letting the words settle like warm dust around us. Later that evening, I was cleaning out the drawer beneath Jonas's old desk when I found it, a tiny cassette tape, carefully labeled in his handwriting, Proposal Deck 2008. Curiosity flickered, then dulled into ache. I played it. Jonas's voice crackled through, younger, filled with nerves and trembling hope. I know she's not perfect, but who's ever loved anyone because they were perfect? You love because of the cracks, because of the way someone tries, even when they're scared. I stopped the tape before it finished, not because I couldn't listen, but because I finally understood that it wasn't mine to hold on to anymore. That love, that version of him, belonged to a past I no longer needed to preserve. I walked out into the cool evening and burned the tape in the old iron fire pit behind the shed, watched it curl and blacken, not with anger, but with reverence. I wasn't erasing him. I was setting the dream free, the one that never really belonged to me. And maybe, in some quiet way, I was finally free too. It was our first spring dinner. I laid the table like I always had. 3 places, out of habit more than hope. 1 for me, 1 for Silas, 1 for Jonas, the empty chair that had stood as a quiet sentinel to all that we had lost. I had never explained it to Silas. I didn't need to. He never asked why the 3rd plate was never removed, or why I still wiped the dust from a chair that hadn't been used in 6 months. Grief has its own unspoken language, and children, they understand it far more deeply than we give them credit for. That evening, I was finishing up the roasted chicken when I heard the soft creak of the floorboards. Silas stepped into the kitchen, holding something folded in his arms. Jonas's old police jacket? It was too big for him, swallowing his narrow shoulders and hanging past his elbows. But he wore it with both pride and tenderness, like he knew exactly what it meant and exactly what it didn't mean. He walked over to the chair, and placed his small hand on the worn wooden back. Then he looked at me and said, simply, "I think Dad's been sitting here long enough. It's my turn now." He pulled the chair out, sat down in it, and smiled at me. Not as a boy trying to be brave, but as someone who had finally decided to live forward. I didn't answer. Not in words. I walked to the cupboard and took out another plate, set it down in front of him like it had always been his. Outside, the wind carried the scent of thawing earth and soft wildflowers. And inside me, the long, bitter winter that had wrapped itself around my ribs began to melt, not all at once, but enough to breathe again, enough to begin.